Okay, hello viewers, and welcome to the 14th video of this channel. So if we can remember that in the previous video we discussed how we can make circular pattern from a 2D sketch or some 2D entities. So today what we'll do, we will see that we will move on to the circular pattern later, but today we will see that how we can convert one element of a 3D system and make a linear pattern out of it. So for that, as usual, we have to first take a plane. So we can take either the front plane or the top plane or the right plane. So I just take a random as the right plane. So there are two categories of making the linear pattern. So one is that if the surface on which I'm going to make a linear pattern of any element, it can be rectangular or a square on a trapezium. The main thing is that it will have a linear direction itself, so we won't have to take a direction for making the linear pattern. And the other one is that we will make a linear pattern out of a circular system. So let's start with the simple one, then we can go to the complex one. So at first I will take just a rectangle with some random dimensions, like 120 and 120. Okay, so now I will just extrude it. I think we are pretty much familiar with this operations of boss extrude and other things. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this face as the plane, and I will just I will just have a square shape element. So just give it a final dimension. Okay, it can be okay. So my sketch of the element which I will make linear pattern is pretty much defined. So I will just have a boss extrude it, and as I'm taking this element as an individual element, not a part of this base plate, so I'm just going to not merge it and keep it as a individual element. Now for the linear patterning of a 3D model or for 3D element, we can either go to the insert option, or here yes, this is the insert option. So we can find this pattern on mirror, then we can find the linear pattern. So if we click the linear pattern option, we will just have portion. We'll have this we'll have the property manager option for forming a linear pattern out of any object. So for forming a linear pattern, we can see that there are some criteria that we have to fill. First of all, I have to give the pattern direction. That means in which direction the pattern will actually form. So we can give it in either this, as it's a rectangular piece, so we have some linear directions by default. So either we can give it in the z direction, which is shown here, as we have taken the right plane, so this is the z direction, or we can give it in the y direction, or we can give it in the x direction. So at first let us select the direction that we will give, will make actually two linear patterns. So we will have actually two linear patterns. One I will make out of this element, and the second pattern will be a pattern of the first pattern. So for the first pattern, I just have to insert a defined linear entity. So I can either take this one or this one. They are both parallel and they are both in the same axis. So I can take this direction, done. So I can reverse the direction, that means the pattern will form in this direction. Okay, so now this is the distance. I have to insert some values, so that when SolidWorks forms this linear pattern, it can take the space, it can determine the space between every two elements, and it can form a linear pattern in the given direction. And this is the number of the instances, that means how many element there will be in the pattern. So it's pretty much familiar with the linear pattern, making a linear pattern of a 2D sketch. So I will move on to the direction 2 later on. So okay, I'm not applying anything on the direction 2, that means my linear pattern will have only one direction. So okay, so now there is the features, phases and bodies option. So basically I will take the features and phases option, because I have made this element with a single feature. I haven't used multiple features. When I would have used multiple features, then I would have used this body option rather than selecting multiple features in the features option. I can just take the body option, and I can click on the selected body to make my linear pattern. So I will take the features, boss extrude 2. So I will just increase the spacing between every two elements. So I will make it 20. And partial preview. Okay, let's see. Now we can see a partial preview of this linear pattern, that this is my reference element, and according to it, and taking reference from it and applying the dimensions and the number of instances which I have inserted, SolidWorks has created a linear pattern of the single element, which consists of 5 of the same kind. So I can just click OK, and my linear pattern is actually done. Now I can do one thing, that if I want to have more linear patterns parallel to this pattern in this plate, so I can do one thing, that I can make a pattern of this one in the Z direction. So I will just go to the linear pattern option, and in this, when I have to give the direction, I will give the Z direction in direction 1. So now it says that it is in the Z direction. So it will do one thing, that it will make the pattern of this linear pattern. If we select this linear pattern feature, or we can just select the individual bodies of these patterns to make us a pattern from any of these elements. So I will not change the spacing or the number of instances. So for that, okay, I will just change the instances, because as per as my assumption, 5 linear patterns of this pattern will not actually cover this plate. It will go out of the boundary of the plate. So the features and phases option, I will take this, not take the pause, I will take this linear pattern option. You see, so I have decided that I will make a linear pattern so I will make a linear pattern of this pattern in the z-axis, and I will make 3 patterns with spacing of 20 millimeters. And if I want, I can also take this the main reference element of the first pattern. So this is the thing. Now if I want to have more 2 patterns in this side, what can I do? That's why there is a second direction given. So I will just take this one. Okay, for clarification and for being much more clear, I will just take this z-axis, and it's actually the same. So I will just reverse the direction. So that means this time the pattern will be in this direction. And number of pattern instances will be 3. So here on the z-axis, on both sides, we have 2 and 2 linear patterns of one reference pattern. So it's pretty easy, and it saves a lot more time rather than making every single element and making a pattern. So as both directions are parallel, so we have to insert this pattern seed only option for constructing the linear pattern. So my linear pattern on a base plate is done in a real quick time. Okay, so this was pretty easy, because my I had reference directions, as I made a linear pattern out of a square. It's actually not a square, it's a kind of a rectangular element. So as I made a linear pattern out of a rectangular element, so I had the predefined directions. But when the z, x, y and z axis, as far as I have taken the plane, so as I have taken the 2D right plane, so I have basically the z, y and z axis. So now the thing is that if I want to make a pattern out of a if my reference plate is circular, so if I have a circular plate and I want some circular pipes on it, sorry, Okay. So the thing is that now I have a circular plate, and there is a single, and I have drawn a single pipe or a cylinder on this circular plate, and I want to have a linear pattern of this pipe in this circular plate. Now the problem in the circular system is that actually in a circular system we can't have a predefined direction, because as we had seen that in a rectangular system we had the z and y directions predetermined, because we could define the axis by taking the edges of the element or the base plate. But here it's basically a circular system, and for making a linear pattern we can't actually apply a circular direction, because it's not going to make a pattern in a circular path. So what I'm going to do, I have to take some reference axis. So I'm going to this insert option, going to the reference geometry, take the axis. So for reference axis option, there is that we have to take some reference entities. Then there are given 5 procedure of how to take the reference axis with reference to one line edge axis, or with reference to 2 planes, or with reference to 2 points, or taking a reference to a the face of a cylinder, or by taking reference from a point and a face of plane. So let us take the reference axis with reference to 2 planes. So if I take the right plane as a reference and the front plane as the required plane, that means if I want to have a direction which will give me the direction of the y-axis, then I will take the right plane as a reference plane, and then I will click the front plane which will give me the y-axis. So it's kind of a, you have to use a little bit geometrical common sense for this. And at first I just by mistake I have clicked the face, so that's not a part of this operation. So done, I have my axis 1, which is, you can see, which is parallel to the y-axis. Now if I want, I can have also one more axis which I will take along the z-axis. So as this is on the right plane, I will just take the right plane as a reference, then I will take top plane for the z-axis. Come on, okay. So here I have the second plane which will define me the y-axis and z-axis. Now after I have taken some planes, I will move on to the axis. I'll move on to the linear pattern option, and then the things are pretty much same. So I will do one thing. I will just at first make a pattern in the y direction. It will have spacing of 20 millimeters, and the instances will be maybe like 15. Let's see if 15 elements can be adjacent in this circular path. So the final thing is that I will have a linear pattern of this circular element on this circular path, having a direction in a direction of axis 1, which is actually parallel to y-axis, and currently I haven't given anything in the y direction, so I will just in the features and phases options, as I have done in the previous operation, I will just click this one. So I have to just minimize the distances and the number of instances. Let's give it to 10. So now in the partial preview, we can see that I have made a linear pattern of this circular element with 10 millimeter of distance or spacing, and there are 10 elements or instances in the linear pattern. So I will make the linear pattern. Okay, so now I want to have this pattern in the Z direction, so I will move on again to the linear pattern option. This time I will select this axis 2, which is actually parallel to the Z axis. So it shows me a by default direction that the pattern will cover this direction. That means the right side of it will cover the right side. So either I can, so if I want to cover the whole circular plate, then I have to again in the second direction I have to just take this one, and you can see as I have taken the same axis, this time it has automatically has reversed the direction. So now what I have to do, I just have to take the linear pattern 3 and the first boss extrude. Okay, now I will just reduce the number of instances to 2, because it will go out of the boundary of the circular plate and it will basically look a little bit of clumsy. So the thing is that now I have made a linear pattern of this pattern in the Z direction, with a general spacing of 10 millimeters. So this pattern is at a distance of 10 millimeters from the reference pattern. So the direction 2 I will just give. Okay, so in direction 2 it has, when I take the axis when I apply the axis 2 as the direction required for direction 2, SolidWorks then makes a pattern of the first reference pattern, then the pattern which I have created. It takes this 2 pattern as a reference for the second direction. That's why when I give instance number of 2, that means I wanted to have a linear pattern of 2 patterns of this pattern. It actually takes reference as these 2 patterns as the reference patterns, and it makes more patterns, and it makes 2 patterns like this. So if I click this one, the both, and it says again that the both pattern directions are parallel. So to avoid it, I will just have the pattern seed only option, and then I can do the linear pattern options. So in this way we can make a linear pattern out from a rectangular base plate of a rectangular element, or from a circular base plate of a circular element. Now as I am gonna finish this video, we must just want to have a little bit of clarification and some technical things. That we might have a question that why are we making a linear pattern in a reference surface, isn't it? So why can't we make it like the 2D sketches? Because in the 2D sketch I didn't need a reference geometry on which I had to draw the geometries which I had to make the linear pattern of. Now the thing is that if I just agree that okay, we can do this thing, so let's make this a linear pattern of this element without using any kind of a reference plate or reference 3D body. So I will take the direction this x is 3, and I will just give 25 millimeters and 3 maybe 5 instances, and I will take this boss extrude option. So I have done the things as I have done in the previous operations. So one thing, that in the partial view we will see that initially the SolidWorks will show the view of the linear pattern, but when we will click OK to execute the operation, it will say that this geometric pattern results in disjoint bodies, isn't it? So if I click again, if you have missed, it says that the geometric pattern results in disjoint bodies. So the thing is that I basically can't make a linear pattern of any 3D elements if they are disjointed, because this if I to go to the 3D view, so we can see that this element and this element are not actually jointed by any material or by any plate. So if it isn't jointed, then I can't actually apply the spacing between these elements to make it a 3D linear pattern. Yes, in the preview we had the linear pattern with the spacings, but it's basically a theoretical thing. But when we have to make a linear pattern of any kind of a 3D element or a 3D, I mean this cylinder or any kind of element which has 3 axes x, y, z, so we must have a joint body as the reference body on which we will make the pattern, so that every element of the linear pattern is jointed with each other. So this was the technical thing. So thank you all, and maybe in the next tutorial video we will discuss about another feature of the pattern and mirror option, which is the circular pattern, and then we will move on to the mirror, and we have pretty much more pattern options like table driven pattern, sketch driven, curve driven, field pattern, variable pattern, and etc, etc. So I will just try to cover up to the at least the basic pattern options, so that we can make some basic patterns as required. So thank you all, and